Hi, good evening. So we have a lot to discuss, but first, thank you, Svi, for inviting me to speak here. Svi asked me to just start by talking a little bit about Nittln. Tonight is what we call in the Jewish community the Nittln, and some people have this custom not to learn Torah on this night. So I'll just have to explain why I'm three reasons why I'm speaking here tonight, Divrei Torah, and why you all came. So the first is, the main point is that the Pashup Shot, the simple reason that this custom developed was that it was a danger for Jews to go out in the small town on a night like this in Eastern Europe before Vatican II, when the Catholics changed their theology. So it used to be dangerous because the priests would get everybody worked up that we killed their God, which doesn't make much sense to me, but that's what they would tell us. So it was a sakanas nefashos. It was dangerous for people's lives to go out to go to a Beis Medrash, and that seems to be why it's explained that that Jews would not learn Torah on this night. Bizman hazeh, in most places that's not such a concern, and then there are other concerns of why dafka you should learn Torah, which we'll talk about in a minute. So, for example, from Chaim Berlin, anyone here learn in Chaim Berlin yeshiva? No Chaim Berlin is here. Okay, so the minhag in Chaim Berlin is on days like Thanksgiving and other legal holidays, they don't acknowledge it. And the reason is because Rav Hutner had this shita that any holiday that is tied to the secular calendar, the non-Jewish calendar, is also to acknowledge. It's chukas hagoyim because it's not the Jewish calendar, it's the Gentile calendar. And therefore, if you go to the Chaim Berlin type shuls around the Chaim Berlin neighborhood, on these legal holidays, any legal holiday, including Thanksgiving, Thanksgiving is not even a day, right? It's just the last Thursday in November, but that's also, November is a non-Jewish month. So they don't change their zmanim for Shacharis, because that would acknowledge the day, and they don't believe you should acknowledge any of the days, and that's actually usher, according to Rav Hutner. So that would be a reason that it's forbidden to acknowledge Nittln because it's tied to the non-Jewish holiday. It's not only tied to the non-Jewish calendar, it's literally a non-Jewish holiday. And that's, sorry? Sunday. Okay. Sunday is part of the Jewish calendar also. We have a Yom Rishon. A better question would be, how come we don't work on Sunday? Because it says, Sheshes Yomim Tavod, so you should be obligated to go to work on Sunday. So we could talk about that some other time. So that's a Chaim. I happen not to be a Chaim Berliner, and so I'm not so makbid. I will daven late on a legal holiday. But there's a Brisker explanation for why we learn on Nittln, and that's the Beis Halevi once. He was in Minsk, and one of the wealthy Balabatim who had certain leanings toward Haskalah, so he gave the Beis Halevi a lecture about how Rabbanim in those days need to be lenient. We need more kulos, because that will keep people more within the Orthodox framework and keep people from going off the derech. And the Beis Halevi said, you're in luck, because I happen to have a lot of good kulos, which we know the Beis Halevi was not known. Briskers are not known for their leniencies, but the Beis Halevi said he did, and this is part of the joke, why we know it. He said, I'll give you 7 kulos. I don't remember all 7 of them, but each one of them is really a chumrah. So, for example, the Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah, there's a din d'Rabbanan, you're supposed to daven Mariv by midnight, by Chatzos. So Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah says, because midei Rabbanan, you're not allowed to daven after Chatzos, after midnight. So if you do, you're not even Yotzei. And the Beis Halevi says, if you happen to be stuck and it's past midnight and you haven't davened yet, I'm makel, you can still daven Mariv. So that's one of his kulos. Another is Tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam. So right, we know we wear tefillin of Rashi. Some people wear an extra set of tefillin. I've seen this Sfardim, sometimes they wear them both at the same time. Tefillin of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. They put the yarmulke on the Rabbeinu Tam so you can't really see the shel rosh, and they cover the extra shel yad with their sleeve. And other people in our community, more often we see they take off their Rashi, they put on the Rabbeinu Tam, they say Shema. So the Shulchan Aruch says you're only allowed to wear tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam as an extra pair if you are muchzak b'chasidus, not if you're a chassid, but if you are someone who's extra special in his frumkeit, goes the extra mile, and the Beis Halevi said, I'm makel, even if you're not muchzak b'chasidus, you can also wear tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam. So another Rizkulaf, which is why I'm mentioning it, is Erev Tisha B'Av that falls on Shabbos. Many people have the minhag, and it's mentioned in Halacha that you shouldn't learn, certainly not the afternoon of Erev Tisha B'Av. But the Beis Halevi said, if Erev Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, so I'm makel, you can learn the whole day all the way up till Shkia. No problem. That's his kula. So the way it was explained to me, the way it was taught to me, was that when it comes See, he was saying it as a kula, but I was taught as a chumrah, that we are machmir on bittul Torah. Whenever there's a case, a question, a subject of bittul Torah, we're machmir, and we say learn. So when it comes to Erev, Tisha B'Av, and Shabbos, it's a subject of learning. Are you allowed to learn or not allowed to learn? So learn. Better they shouldn't have any bittul Torah. So when it comes to Nittln, also, there's a question of whether this minhag should even apply nowadays. So certainly we should be machmir on bittul Torah, and we should learn at night. And my son, he's not back from Mishmar yet at yeshiva. His yeshiva still has normal zmanim, and they're still learning it tonight. Sorry? I'm sure Chaim Berlin still has Mishmar also. And there's a further reason, because we're just talking about learning. But there's something called, there's an extra special mitzvah of Talmud Torah derabim, of learning in public. And that even overrides certain very basic halachas. The Gemara says that you were not mafsik, you don't stop a shir. If you have a daf yomi in the morning, and then Zman Tefillah comes, you don't stop the shir. Everybody davens, you finish the shir, and then you daven. However, the Ran and the Mefarshim, the Ran specifically says this: if you're someone on the level of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, you keep learning even if you'll miss the Zman. Forget about davening. His learning Torah overrides the chiyuv of Tefillah. So Rabbi Yochanan in the Gemara says that's Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, people on his level. Rabbi Yochanan says, I'm not on that level, so I have to stop and daven before the Zman comes. So for all of us, if we're learning, so you keep learning, but you make sure you daven, and especially if you're in a shul, when the minyan starts, you start with the minyan. The Ramah holds, however, there's an extra level of Talmud Torah derabim. Talmud Torah derabim. If there's a shir going on, he says the shir overrides tefillah, and if the shir is going, if you're a magid shir and you don't have time to daven, the Ramah paskins, just you have to say the first pasuk of Kriya Shema. And you somewhere in the shir you have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim, and that's it. Don't daven. Skip davening, because Talmud Torah derabim is more important than davening. Not davening b'tzibur, then davening. This is a Ramah. Not all of the poskim agree. Chai Adam doesn't agree, but the Mishnah Berurah, he seems to he's not so sure whether to follow that or not. But that's the Ramah. An Avel, Lo Aleinu, someone who's an Avel. So Avel has to sit shiva. Sitting shiva means you stay in your house and you sit shiva. But if he has to give a shir, and there's no one else to give the shir, so then the Avel in Shiva goes to the Beis Medrash and gives the shir. Now, some people say this only after the third day. I think the Taz says it's only after the third day of Shiva. But the Arshita is also that even on the first day of Shiva, which is Deraisa, you get up and you go and you give the shir, because Talmud Torah derabim overrides even Shiva. So when you're talking about a suffix of a minhag, the way I was taught, learning Torah in public is more important than this minhag of Nittln, especially nowadays, where in places like here where it's not such a danger, not a danger at all. Okay, so Lenience. So we're talking about Jedis in Halacha. So I'm not. Those of us who grew up in America, the popular culture seeps through, and things like Star Wars, whether you've seen the movies or not, you know plenty about it. So as not only as a joke, but everything has a place in Halacha. So I was thinking about different aspects of these Jedis and how they fit into Halacha. Lu Yitzuyah, for example, just theoretically, there was such a thing as a Jedi. So we'll just talk about a few.
What's a Jedi?
What's a Jedi? Okay, well we'll go in that direction. Yeah, these are people with special powers. You'll understand as we get to each power that we talk about. Okay, we'll go with that. We'll explain each along the way. So the Jedis are these super types of monks with powers, supernatural powers, and they're called guardians of the peace. And it struck me that guardians of the peace originally seemed like some sort of a bodyguard, but later, eventually, they became generals. How many guardians of a peace are generals in an army? It seems like to me like a stira. That's a contradiction. If they're supposed to be peaceful, they're supposed to be some sort of monks or something like that. What are they doing leading an army in battle? So I think the answer lies in the Hilchos Melchama. The Rambam at the end of Mishnah Torah, he has a section called Hilchos Melachim, and a few chapters of Hilchos Melachim talk about the laws of Melchama. So the Rambam distinguishes, and it's really in the Gemara, between two types of wars. Well, first let's talk about a bodyguard. A bodyguard is a very simple concept in Halacha, and that's that we're supposed to, there's an Isser of Lo Samod Al Dam Reyacha. if you see someone who is being injured and who is in a life-threatening situation, you are obligated to try to save him, and that's a bodyguard. Even if you're trained, even more so. And if you're not trained, you're supposed to do as much as possible to save someone. And that's what I think of a protector of the peace should be. It should be a bodyguard, some sort of a protector, defender. But the Rambam says like this. This is what he says in Hilchos Malachim. Ein melech nilcham tchila. He's talking about a king. A king leads the battle. He decides to go out to war. So the king, ein hamelech nilcham tchila ela melchemes mitzvah. Only when it's a war that is considered a mitzvah. An obligatory, a mandatory war. Ve'ezohi melchemes mitzvah. So what kind of a war is mandatory? That you're obligated to go to war. Zo melchemes shiva amamim. Battling against the 7 nations who had sovereignty over Eretz Yisrael, so conquering Eretz Yisrael. Milchemes Amalek, we know battling against Amalek. Ve'ezras, here's the important one. Ve'ezras Yisrael miyad sar sheba aleim. Saving Jews from any enemy who comes on them. It's a defensive war. And this is Nogeya Bizman Hazeh. When there are wars going on in Eretz Yisrael, when there are enemies who come and attack the Jews, it is a Milchemes Mitzvah. I think all the poskim say, even the Chazon Ish said, it's a Milchemes Mitzvah to defend Eretz Yisrael from the enemies.
Even if there's no melech?
Even without a melech. Ve'achar kach nilcham b'Milchemes Rishus. So the king also can do this Milchemes Rishus. This is an optional war. So what's an optional war? V'hi ha'milchama shenilcham im shar ha'amim. It's a war that the king has against any other nation, not the 7 nations, not Amalek, any other nation. K'tei laharchiv gvul Yisrael, to expand the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. Ulaharbos b'geduloso v'shomo, and also to make him a little more famous. He's a king who can conquer, and that's something good for Klal Yisrael also. And that's optional. Bismana that you're not allowed to do a Milchemes Rishus. All the poskim say you need a king for that. You need a Sanhedrin. You need an Urim v'Tumim, which we don't have, but. Milchemes Mitzvah, that is shayach, at least in terms of defending Klal Yisrael. So we have a defensive war here, and we have an offensive war. A defensive war is Milchemes Mitzvah, to defend Jews. An offensive war is to expand. It's to grow the territory. So when we talk about a guardian of the peace to me sounds like people engage in a Milchemes Mitzvah. And if the Jedis are generals, I would expect them to only be generals in any type of defensive war. But in offensive war, I would expect the Jedis to sit back. And the experts tell me they're not aware of any offensive war that the Jedis did, in fact, lead armies in. It was only defensive wars. Okay, so let's say, can a Jedi go into retirement? So apparently there was one Jedi who did go into retirement. Is that mutter? Because if you have powers, if you're stronger, if you're more powerful than anyone else, you should be obligated, lo samad al dam reyecha, you should be obligated to defend people, to save people. If there are bad guys going around and you're able to stop them, you should be mechuyev. You shouldn't be able to go to some desert planet and hide out there. You should be out there saving people's lives. The Shulchan Aruch says, the very, very end of Choshen Mishpat, there's halachas of chovel b'chavero, of personal injury. So haroa es chavera toveya bayam. If you see a Jew drowning, chalila, or listing boin alav, or robbers or bandits coming on him, or chaya ra'a ba'alav, or a dangerous animal who's trying to attack him, ve'yachol hatzilo, and you, or whoever is there, is able to save him, hu be'asmo, by yourself. Oh, and here's the key phrase. Oh, sheyiskar acherim lahatzil, or you could hire someone else. You could hire someone to save. Velo hitzil, and you didn't do that. You refrained from doing that. So over alosam al dam reyecha. It's an isser. It's an isser deraisa to not only to not yourself save him, but also to hire, to pay for Hatzalah. Every time you give money to Hatzalah, that is a mitzvah. So l'chora, it would seem like any Jedi is not allowed to go into retirement because he is obligated to use his powers to save people. However, the question is, if you're being pursued, if you're in danger, how much danger do you have to put yourself in to go out to save other people, right? So someone's drowning, Khalila, in the water, you don't know how to swim. So you're mechuyev to try to save him. But let's say, what's the chances? So you jump in the water, and you don't know how to swim, so how are you really going to save him? So it's possible. So what are the possibilities? What are you required to do? Or there's a burning building. You could run in and try to save as many people as possible. especially if you're trained to do that. If a fireman, so a fireman is in front of a burning building, when is he obligated to go in and save people, and when is he not obligated to? How much risk does he have to put himself in? So the Beis Yosef, he quotes the Hagos Maimonios, who states that even if there's a sakana, you have to put yourself in that danger to save someone else. However, in the Shulchan Aruch, it's the same author, Beis Yosef, Shulchan Aruch, same author, he doesn't quote that Hagos Maimonios. And the question is, why not? Because the Hagos Maimonios, he actually quotes the Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi is like this. Rabbi Imi was captured, and he was held in a prison. And they were trying to figure out, what do we do with this rabbi? So the rabbis were discussing. So Reish Lakish said, I'm going to go get him, and either I'm going to get killed, or I'm going to save him. So notice who said this, Reish Lakish. Anyone know why it's significant that Reish Lakish said it? Because Reish Lakish, when he was younger, he was a master criminal. As he learned Torah, he got weaker, but apparently he was trained. He was trained. He knew what he was doing. So if there was any rabbi who was going to save you, you'd want it to be Reish Lakish. So he said, he's going to storm the castle. Literally, he's going to storm the castle, and either he comes out with the prisoner, or he doesn't come out at all. And that seems like a pretty good proof text, like a good raya, that we're all obligated to put ourselves in danger to save someone. The question is, why don't we paskin like this Yerushalmi? So that's, Achronim like to try to figure that out, right? You have a clear source saying one thing, no one paskins like that, so why don't we? So that's when the Achronim get to be creative. So one of the sources that they quote is a Gemara Nida about Rabbi Tarfon. Some people were accused of being murderers, some Jews, and the Jews were trying to hide from the authorities, and they came to Rabbi Tarfon and they said, hide us, the police are coming to get us. And Rabbi Tarfon said, no, which and it's not exactly clear what he said. Why? He said, because if you're guilty, then it'll seem like I'm guilty and I'll get punished also. It's not clear what that means. So Tosfos quotes the She'eltis, who say that Rabbi Tarfon was not allowed to risk his life to save these other people's lives. If it would have been free of risk, that would have been okay. So they quote this as a proof against the Yerushalmi that we paskin like the Bavli, not the Yerushalmi, and this Rabbi Tarfon, according to the She'eltis. But everything is risky, right? Driving in the street is risky. Are you obligated to? You see someone bleeding, you want to take him to the hospital, but driving him to the hospital is dangerous. Maybe you should say, I'm not obligated to drive on the street because it's dangerous to take this guy to the hospital. That's a little ludicrous. It's crazy. So what's the level of danger we're obligated to put our lives in to save someone else? And this is Nogea Halacha L'Maisa for all of us, even driving to the hospital, for someone in Hatzalah, even more so, firemen. So the Radbaz has a tshuva, and the poskim follow this Radbaz. The Radbaz seems to say that it's 50% chance of survival. If there's a 50% chance that if you run into that burning house, you'll be able to come back out, then you're obligated to go in to save the people there. If it's less than a 50% chance of survival, then you're not obligated. Which, think about that. That's pretty low threshold of survival. I'd like more than a flip of a coin to know whether I'm going to come out. But that's the Sicilia, the Shevet Levi, they paskin like this. It's a 50% chance. But I believe firemen and Hatzalah volunteers, they're also trained that if it's too dangerous, burning house, don't go in. You have to assess the risk before you go in. So let's say a Jedi is being pursued by these bad guys, Darth Vader, whoever. So they have to figure out how risky it is for them to go out in public. So if there's more than a 50% risk for them to go out in public and save other people, so then they're allowed to retire. If it's less than a 50% risk, then they're not allowed to retire. They have to actually use their powers to help other people. So one of the ways that these Jedis and the Darth Vader types can kill people is through what they call a force choke. Force choke is just by thinking they can choke people. And sometimes they use a hand. Let me read to you what I found this online. And something called Wikipedia, not Wikipedia, Wikipedia. They define a force choke as a dark side force power where one would strangle the victim with a force. It was often performed with a grip-like gesture. So let's think this through for a minute. Is a Jedi chayiv misa if he kills someone with a force choke? It's just theoretical. Right? We all know it doesn't exist, but that's how we determine halacha, by pushing things to the extreme. There is a precedent in halacha for this. So let's assume that this fourth choke, this grip-like gesture, is not necessary. And Darth Vader, if you tied his hands behind his back, he could still kill someone just by thinking about it. So is he chayav misa just by thinking about murder? So it's possible to compare this to killing someone with a Shem Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu in Mitzrayim, he saw the Egyptian almost beating a Jewish slave almost to death. So Moshe Rabbeinu used the Shem HaMeforesh, and he killed the Egyptian. And just by saying that name, he was able to kill the Egyptian. So the poskim ask, so let's say, okay, so fine, that was a case of Lo Saman Al Dam Reyecha. Moshe Rabbeinu was saving someone's life. But if he wasn't saving someone's life, and it wasn't Moshe Rabbeinu, someone else used Shem Hashem to kill someone, so would that person be chayiv misa? So the Chuvas Halachos Ketanos, he discusses this issue, and he thinks that you would be chayiv misa, even if all you did was say, you just said a word, and then Hashem did everything, you still would be chayiv misa for saying that, for doing that.
What about the Rabbi?
Oh, I'm about to get there, exactly. So the Chida asked that kasha. So it's a good question. So the Chida asks, so there are cases in the Gemara of a rabbi just looking at someone and through that stare, killing them. So for example, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was in a cave for many years just learning, and he came out and he saw this Jew who was working, and he couldn't fathom how someone could leave learning Torah, the Olam Haba, just to do something, to earn a living for Olam Hazeh. And just by staring at him, I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but just by staring at him, he killed him. And the other cases, there's a case of a Rebbe who stared at a Talmud and who killed him. So not everybody takes it all literally that the Rebbe or Reb Shimon Bar Yochai killed someone else, but it could be taken literally, and the Chida does. And he says, Chas v'shalom, they should be chayiv misa for that. So the Chida distinguishes between when you kill someone by saying something, or when you kill someone just by thinking it. Just by thinking or by looking, you don't actually do anything. So if there's no Maisa, so then it's just Hashem who's doing the killing. So that you would not be chayiv misa for. But if you said something with the Shem HaMeforesh, the Chida says you would be chayiv misa. And then there's Reb Chaim Pelagi. He takes a totally different approach. He says anything that's not b'derech hatev, anything that's not natural, it's not really you doing the killing. It's Hashem. You're asking Hashem to do it, and Hashem does it. So no, if someone takes a gun and shoots someone chalila, so that is b'derech hateva, and whoever pulls the trigger is chayiv misa, assuming all the other conditions are taken. And anyone who does anything b'derech hateva would be chayiv misa. But if anything that's supernatural, it's not you, it's Hashem. And it's in such a case, so then you would not be chayiv misa whatsoever. So let's go back. So according to what happened to Darth Vader with his fourth choke? So according to the Halachas Ketanos, it seemed he would be chayiv misa. Darth Vader would be chayiv misa. According to the Chida, according to Reb Chaim Pelagi, he would not be chayiv misa, but he would literally get away with murder. And that raises two questions. One question is, doesn't Hashem always kill everybody? I mean, how is there any death without Hashem's involvement? So why was Reb Chaim Pelagi distinguishing between b'derech hateva, natural ways of dying, and supernatural ways of dying? Either way, if Hashem doesn't decree on Rosh Hashanah that someone's going to die, they're not going to die. So you're one step ahead of me once again. So it's a machlokes Tosfos and the Chovos Halevavos. There's a Tosfos in the beginning of Eilan Aros in Ksubas. Talks about suicide. Can someone commit suicide if it hasn't been decreed on Rosh Hashanah that they should die?
How do they know?
Okay, in a Chanami, how would they know? You never know, for sure. But the question is, anyone who commits suicide will get in trouble for it. But is it even possible? So, Tosfos says it is. Tosfos says, "Akol b'idei shamayim chutz mitzinim pachim." Everything is in Hashem's hands except for cold and heat, and people can kill themselves by subjecting themselves to extreme of cold and extreme of heat. Therefore, says Tosfos, it's possible to commit suicide without it being decreed, without it being biyad Hashem. Chovos Halevavos says there's no such thing. Every type of suicide has been decreed. That person would die. It doesn't have to be a suicide, but that person would die. Everybody agrees it's a bad thing. Chalila, we should even consider such things. But there can be deaths that were not decreed beforehand, and that is the Tosfos' shita, and there are other shitas like that also. The Rashbash, Reb Shlomo ben Shimon Duran, who was the big posek in Algiers in the 1400s. So the Rashbash has a whole tshuva on it, on how can someone die if it hasn't been decreed on Rosh Hashanah, what exactly is decreed on Rosh Hashanah. Maybe we could talk about it Elul time. But he also says that people could die without the decree of Hashem. Not that the decree on Rosh Hashanah is not important; it is very important in most cases. But there are such cases where it can happen without the decree of Hashem. And I think that's how I understand Reb Chaim Pelagi, that there can be a natural death that was not decreed by Hashem. But if it's supernatural, it's only happening if Hashem does it. The other question was, how could we ever let Darth Vader get away with murder? It doesn't make sense. I mean, you see it happening. You see, you're an eyewitness. You see he's doing the fourth choke, and you see the guy is dying. How could we let this guy get away with murder? So there's in the beginning of Makos, there's a very strange machlokas between Rashi and Tosfos. I don't want to get into the details of the case because it's about Edom Zomermim. The witnesses say this, the other witnesses say that. It gets complicated. But Rashi says if a murderer, so we know if someone commits a civil offense and is fined for it, he has to pay a knas, he has to pay a fine. So if a modeh b'knas is pater, if you admit to it, you don't have to pay the fine. So Rashi says someone who's chayiv misa, if he admits to it before the bezdin, before the sentencing, before the gemar bezdin, so if a modeh b'misa is pater, if you admit it. Tosfos says, how could that be? When would we ever have any chiyuv misa ever? When would there be any execution ever? If a murderer can literally confess and then get away from the execution, fine. So bezdin can maybe put him in a jail cell for a while and do something else. But if there's no execution, then what's the whole? We have 4 ways of killing someone. How is it ever shaykh to kill anybody if a modeh b'misa is pater? So the Maras Chaya says, just look a few blot later in Makos, and the Tanaim are saying, if I was in a bezdin, if I was alive in the Sanhedrin, we would never execute anybody. Chazal were very, very hesitant to execute anyone. In order to be Chayiv Misa, you have to have the witnesses, warn him in advance, and he has to accept it and say, I acknowledge that you're the warning, and I'm still going to do it anyway. It's very, very hard for anyone to be Chayiv Misa. And the Tanaim are saying, well, if a bezdin who executes anybody once in 7 years, 70 years, the different opinions in the Mishnah. So that's considered the terrible thing. So the answer is, so the Maras Chai says, what do you mean? Of course, that's what Rashi means. We rarely give it. We let lots of people get away with murder. That's how Chazal said. That's how the Torah set up the system. Is that it's very hard to get Chiv Misa. Now, if there's a problem of crime, so then the Chachamim of the generation have to take care of that through extra legal punishments. But that was after the Gemar Bezdin. After the Gemar Din. That's the difference. So, but you're right. You step ahead. You're doing good here. So everybody had to confess, but if you could, it was before the Gemar Bezdin or Gemar Din or after. As there's a whole shaila of if someone does tshuva. So, in America, if any capital court case goes on for years and years and years, and most of them, or many of them, find religion at some point in time, because that's all they have to do, is the only people they can speak to generally is the rabbi or the minister. So a lot of them do tshuva. So if someone does tshuva, does he still get the executed? And the answer of everybody is, of course he does. The question is why. But also they do vidu. But the issue is, at what point? If it's before the sentencing, before the Gemar Din, so then, according to Rashi, you would not, such a murderer would not be punished. So we ran out of time. So I'm not recommending anyone see any movies here. I'm just talking about what happened in popular culture, and we should all have a good legal holiday and enjoy our time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my student. Please remember to make a bracha for the cleanup.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.